Hey everybody, I'm going to tell you a story that starts out when I was a kid. It starts out with a very good vibe, but then it gets very, very dark. So stick around.
Planet Square for 148 North St. Andrews, Prowler Nursing.
Oh my god, we're fucking rich.
This story today opens up with a story from my childhood. It begins with my brother and I working on my banana seat bike and converting it to a BMX bike. It was the summer of 1975. I was 11 years old, and the bike I had wasn't that great, but we were going to try and turn it into something that looked and rode like a dirt bike. My brother's bike, on the other hand, was a brand new Panda BMX bike that he had won at the annual Easter egg hunt that spring. You had to be 12 years old to enter the Easter egg hunt, and my brother was 13. He lied about his age, and he entered it anyways, and when they yelled go, everybody ran to where all the Easter eggs were, and if you found one that was wrapped in tinfoil, chances were pretty good that you had won a very nice prize. My brother ran to the tree where we knew a tinfoil wrapped egg was, hidden because we got there early to watch where they put all the good eggs. Anyways, he brought the egg back to the judges, and when they unwrapped, there was a number on it. That number matched the one with the brand new bike, so he won this fantastic BMX bike, and it was the best bike that we had ever seen. He got his picture in the paper and everything. Anyways, back to the story. So we were working on my bike, converting it to a BMX, and in those days, that consisted of putting BMX handlebars on it, a 10-speed seat, and two knobby tires, and then we were ready to go. And then he said to me, "Are you coming with me?" I said, well, this was seldom heard by me in them days because I have two older brothers, and they rarely asked me to go with them anywhere. But my oldest brother was gone that day, so I was finally included for once, and I asked him where we were going, and he told me that we were going up to Doug and Glenn's house. So I said, sure, I'll go with. So Doug was my brother's age, and his brother Glenn was my oldest brother's age. So when we got there, Doug was working on his bike, turning it into a BMX bike, and we decided to have a BMX race in their yard. Well, of course, we always had to have some mud on the track, so we got the water hose out and we got the grass all wet, and we made a little track that went around their yard and out onto the street. The street was the long straightaway which led to jumping the curb and then back up to the lawn. And then we went around and around, and the track kept on getting more worn out and wrecked. It was Doug, myself, and my brother racing around the track. I was the youngest, so I was the slowest. Doug was riding his bike, and the frame snapped, and he couldn't race it anymore. So we decided, because I was slower than them, that Doug's older brother Glenn was going to be my new teammate, and Doug and my brother were going to race on my brother's bike, and we were going to have a little tag team race on the track, kind of like a relay. We would race for 2 laps around the track, and then your teammate would jump on and he would go 2 laps and so forth. Everybody got time to rest. While we were racing, Doug and Glenn had to stop once in a while to see what their little brother was up to. Their little brother was in a playpen out in the yard with us, and he was about 1.5 years old, and his name was Ricky. They were kind of pissed at their mom about having to watch Ricky while their mom was taking a nap. They were actually mad because they had a little brother, it seemed. I thought little Ricky was cool as hell, and I never had a little brother, so every time it was my turn to wait for my teammate to ride around the track, I would play with little Ricky. He was always smiling and really liked me, I noticed. So shortly after that day, Doug, Glenn, little Ricky moved 15 miles away, and 8 years later, Glenn got killed in a car crash after he had been drinking. After that, I became a teenager and eventually got my driver's license, and life went on. So now we fast forward this story to 2001, 26 years later. I remember walking up to a garage where a friend of mine was making meth. I had brought him 800 sinus allergy pills a few hours before, which means he should be getting done with a fresh batch of meth. So he's taking his sweet old time trying to stall so he can find a chance to rip me off because he was a fucking loser, and he was he sucked. But he's got this buddy with him that I've never met before, and me and his buddy hit it off, and he's a funny guy, and his sense of humor made me think that I had known him my whole life. Then a few nights later, we were making meth again, and that same guy was there, and we were having a good time. His name was Rick. And we started talking, and I asked him his last name, and I couldn't fucking believe it. He was Little Ricky. The reason it felt like I knew him is because he had the same sense of humor as his big brother Glenn had. Of course, he didn't remember the last time we met, but it didn't matter because we knew right then we were going to be friends for a long time. I already knew his whole family. His father was the head of the Boy Scouts when I was a kid. Rick could always make me laugh. He could do a spot-on impression of Joe Dirt, and he made me laugh so hard. After that, he started helping me and working in my bike shop. We would get buzzed, and he would instantly turn into Joe Dirt for an hour straight. Damn, he made me laugh so fucking hard. I still think about those days a lot. So then Rick had gotten into trouble driving drunk. He finally opened up to me that he and his brother Glenn were really close when his brother got killed. Even though he was severely depressed, I tried to help him any way possible. One day he told me that his brother Doug gave him some of his clean urine so he could go take a piss test for a job opportunity, and the test came up negative and he got the job. Then I hadn't seen Rick for a few weeks until one day he walked into the shop and told me that he had found a girlfriend and he's clean from drugs and that he also quit drinking. I was extremely proud of him. Although I was still using and selling meth, I was really proud of him. I stayed away from him and didn't call him at all because I wanted him to stay clean. So it had been 4 years since that day until one day he walked back into my bike shop and I was really glad to see him. He took out his bag of meth and told me he wanted to catch a buzz with me. He said he started a couple months before. So we got high and it was like old times and we laughed and had a good time, and Rick was back. I was still disappointed because, he started using again. He's going to do what he's going to do. So at the time I was buying an ounce of meth at a time, and for some of my friends like Rick, I would front them an 8-ball to sell, and then he would bring back the money to me after he got done selling it. So business was pretty good, and I had Rick and a couple other guys running around town selling meth for me, and it was at this time I was introduced to another guy for the first time. It all started when I received a phone call from a friend of mine, and him saying that a guy named Ninja Nate wanted to come up and see if I wanted to buy a bike from him. I said sure to bring him up because everybody had to call me first before they brought anybody new into the bike shop, but I had heard of Ninja Nate and had heard that he is batshit crazy, and he's a good fighter, so I was a little bit curious about him, but I had never met him before. So the next thing you know, I'm sitting in my bike shop, and in walks my friend and Ninja Nate. And Nate is carrying a bicycle that he cut up into 3 pieces. I asked him why he cut it up into 3 pieces, and he told me that his wife left him and he did not want her to get her bike back. He said the sight of her bike pissed him off and he was sick of looking at it, so he cut it up into 3 pieces and brought it up to me and thought that maybe I could use some of the parts off it. But what he really wanted was meth. So of course I got him high and I humored him and I gave him $20 for the bike and sent him on his way. So yeah, that seemed a little bit crazy to me, but that's nothing compared to a few days later when my friend and I stopped by his house and we walked up to his front door and looked down on the sidewalk, and his billfold was spread out like after you ran your billfold through the washing machine where you lay it out to dry it all out with all the stuff laying out. When he came outside, we asked him about his wallet, and he said that he had just jumped off the bridge into the Mississippi River the night before and his wallet was wet. We asked him why he jumped off a bridge, and he told us that he just wanted to go for a swim. Well, that bridge, we knew what bridge it was. It was 70 feet high. That's how I was introduced to Ninja Nate, and I found out later that he was bipolar, and when he chose to self-medicate with meth and not take his medication, that he would get a little crazy. So anyways, one day Rick walks into the bike shop. He wants to front an 8-ball from me, so I gave it to him, and he tells me that he will be back later on that night. Well, the night came and went. After the second night of not seeing Rick come back with the money, I started asking around and seeing if anybody had seen him. Well, it turned out that he was down at Ninja Nate's house. So I went down to his house and knocked on the door, and Ninja Nate came to the door, and he had a weird look in his eye and told me that Rick was not there. I told him that I just need to talk to him and it's all cool and not to worry about it. So Rick came to the door, told me that he didn't have any money for me and that he would make it up to me by the next day. I explained to him that I need that money so I can keep on selling. If I didn't get it, would basically stop me dead in my tracks as far as being able to get more. He promised me that he would have the money the next day, so I waited, and the next day he showed up carrying a bag with something in it. Before I continue telling the story, I have to stop right here and tell you that this is where the story takes a bad turn. And for everybody to keep in mind that when you hear someone tell you that doing drugs never hurt anybody, they're full of shit, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, to put into perspective what we have so far, we have Rick that is now hanging out with Ninja Nate, and they're shooting dope in their arms using a syringe. One of them is bipolar, and the other one is majorly depressed. One is not taking his meds, and the other one needs psychiatric help. And anyways, I shouldn't have to tell you, this isn't going to end well. So anyways, back to the story. So Rick walks in with some kind of duffel bag, and that basically tells me that he doesn't have any money, and whatever's in that bag he's going to use as collateral or give it to me instead of the money. So he tells me he doesn't have the money, and he reaches in the bag and pulls out a flag and spreads it out, and it is a genuine, authentic World War II Nazi battle flag. I couldn't believe my eyes. I said, "Where the fuck did you get that? And is it real?" And he tells me that he took it from his attic because he's living with his dad, and that his dad got it from his grandpa, and his grandpa brought it home from the war when they liberated a concentration camp. His grandpa took the Nazi battle flag off the flagpole and brought it home with him from Germany. Rick insisted that we go to the pawn shop and take a loan for $150 so he could pay me back. Then we could get more meth and then earn the money to get the flag back and then bring it back to his attic before his dad found out it was gone. It sounded like a good plan, so we went to the pawn shop, and when I showed it to the pawn shop clerk, his hands were shaking when I handed it to him because he had never seen a Nazi flag in this good of shape, because it was mint shape, it was hand stitched, and it wasn't printed. Every different piece of color on that flag was a different piece of cloth. It was amazing, and it was a piece of history that once you looked at it, you could not look away from it. It was so scary looking, and it had such an evil feeling to it. And like I said, you just couldn't look away from it, and you couldn't unsee it. It was so scary looking, and it had such an evil feeling to it. Like I said, you just couldn't look away from it, and you couldn't unsee it. So anyways, we got a $150 loan, and then we got some more meth, and we went to work, and eventually, within a few days, we had the $150 to get the flag back, because I wanted nothing more but to get that flag back to his dad, and back to his dad's attic, so Rick wouldn't get in trouble, and he would continue to be able to live with his dad. So we got the flag back. We went back up to the bike shop, and we were sitting there getting high like we usually do. And there was another guy there that was a friend of a friend, and he asked Rick if he wanted to sell the flag, and I told him, "Don't do it." Then Rick asked him how much he thought he could get for it, and the dude said 3 8-balls, and that's all that Rick needed to hear. And he handed him over that flag so fast. That dude walked out of my shop, and that's the last time we ever saw him or the flag. Well, Rick's dad found out that the flag was gone. Rick denied it, that he took it. Rick got kicked out of the house, and his dad was renting a farmhouse. Basically, I asked Rick about it, and I said, "Well, what happened?" And he said, I was sitting there eating breakfast, eating a bowl of cereal, and my dad come up and said, "Hey, did you take that flag of Grandpa's?" And he said, "No." He goes, "Well, Rick, you're the only one that lives here besides me, and I know that I didn't take it." He goes, "Nope, wasn't me." So that pissed his dad off. And the farmer that rented his dad the house kicked him out of the farmhouse because Rick was stealing tools and farm equipment from the barn to pay for the meth that him and his new friends were shooting into their veins. Eventually, Rick became homeless, and I only seen him from time to time, and when I did, he was usually flailing around and looking pretty rough. It was around this time that my 12-year-old daughter came up to me and told me that one of her classmates' mom had been murdered by some psychopath that lived in their apartment building. It was in the newspaper and all over the news. The classmate was staying over at a friend's house at the time of the murder. Somebody in the building called the police because they heard screaming, and when the police showed up, the killer was walking around the hallways in the apartment building covered in blood, carrying a hammer, mumbling that aliens told him to do it. The killer was hauled away and is locked away somewhere, I'm sure, and that classmate of my daughter's never saw her mom again, not even at the funeral because it was a closed casket. I did not recognize the killer's name in the paper, but I later found out that it was Ninja Nate. As for Rick, he did come around again and hung out with me, and he told me that he was not shooting up anymore and he was just smoking meth, and he did look a lot better. He then moved into a house that was owned by a mutual friend. After that, Rick was doing pretty good. And then in August 2017, my house got raided, I got busted, and I went to jail. And then I got clean, and I've been clean ever since. Then in 2018, I called up the mutual friend because I wanted to get a hold of Rick, and he said that Rick started shooting up again, and he had all of his stuff still at his house. He told me that Rick left one night, and he was supposed to be back in a half hour. He was going to go on a drug run, and he never came back, and it was the last he ever seen of Rick. Rick was really close to his dad, and his dad still lives in town. Of course, we called his dad time after time, but he never did go back to his dad's house either. Now it's been about 8 years, about 7 years. My friend and Rick's dad are still waiting for him to come back, but we believe that he's probably in a shallow grave somewhere. I still think about Rick often, and I was inspired to retell this story in hopes of making people aware of how serious it is when mental health disorders go untreated. I'm really curious how all of you listeners feel about this story. It often breaks my heart to retell some of these stories, and I'm wondering if it helps any of the people that reads them or hears them who may be in recovery from a substance use disorder. Please leave a comment in the comments below, or feel free to ask any questions. Leave a like and subscribe. Now hold on a second. That is where the original story was supposed to end, because I wrote the story about 3 years ago. But last week, an old friend of mine that I've known since high school called me up, and he knew that I collected vintage BMX bikes. So he calls me up and tells me, hey, I got a guy that has sheds full of stuff, and he has some bikes that maybe I would be interested in buying. Now, in the mid to late 80s, I did a lot of cocaine like everybody else did, and the friend who called me was the biggest coke dealer I ever knew. So he makes a phone call and calls the guy up, and he's home, and he says, come on out. And it turns out that the place where we're going to look at this bike is his old cellmate from when he was in prison. He did 8 years. So he calls up the guy and says to come out. So we head out to the town he lives in. It's about 10 miles away. And I asked him what his name was. He told me his first name, and it just so happened to be the same name that the guy that took our flag told us who was the guy that was going to buy our flag. In the town that he told me where we were going was not the town where the flag was supposed to be going to. I thought the flag was in a different town, which is if you go to the town that we're heading to, you take a left and go out another 5 miles, and that's where the flag was supposedly at. Well, at least that's where it was supposed to be 20 years ago. So my buddy told me that the guy that we're going to visit was his cellmate in prison. So we get to this town 10 miles away, and my buddy says, okay, take a left here. And then I asked him how far down the road. He said, oh, about 5 miles. So I asked my buddy, I said, I wonder if the motherfucker's got my Nazi flag. So we got there, and we went into the garage. I met the guy, and he seemed really cool. It's obvious to me that he's still using meth and probably selling it. So we go out into his backyard and in his shops and look at some of his stuff. Reminds me of American Pickers, but most of the stuff is frozen in the snow. And I told him that I'll probably come back in the spring so I can see everything, because we have so much snow right now. I did find a couple items that I was interested in buying, and we went back in the shop and sat down, and we were bullshitting, and he told me that when he got back from prison, when he was with Sean, that most of his good stuff had been stolen. He went on to tell me that one of the best things that he ever had that got stolen while he was in prison was a Nazi flag from World War II. My buddy looked at me and said, "Holy shit, you were right." So I went on to tell him the whole story about the flag and where it came from, and he was blown away. So me and my buddy drove home 4 nights ago. I couldn't believe that I finally found out what happened to that flag. It got stolen from me and sold to another meth dealer, and then it was stolen from him when he went to prison. It's a very common story that happens to a lot of treasures that get stolen by addicts from family members and people that they love, and then they trade those treasures for the meth or heroin or crack that they love so much. It happened then, and it happens now, and it will happen till the end of time. My buddy and I are doing well. We are clean from all substances. The guy that we went and visited has a court case pending because he got caught with 1.5 pounds of meth. And I'm pretty sure it's going to end up with him being locked in a cage for a very long time. And that's the end of the story of Ninja Nate and Joe Dirt. Thanks for listening.